Imagine waking up in a stone fortress, while the world outside freezes solid. The wind howls across the battlements. Snow piles against the castle walls like white siege towers. The river that once carried food and trade is now a sheet of ice. And the roads, buried, silent, useless. In medieval Europe, winter was not just a season. It was an enemy. And for the people living inside castles, survival depended on preparation, discipline, and a few ingenious tricks that most modern historians rarely talk about. Because when the deadliest winters came, castles didn't just endure them, they outlasted them. Picture a castle somewhere in northern Europe around the year 1300. From a distance, it looks invincible. Thick stone walls, watchtowers rising like jagged teeth against the gray sky, a moat frozen into a ring of ice. But step inside, and the reality is far less comfortable. Stone walls don't hold heat. They absorb cold. Inside the great hall, the air is damp and biting. Smoke drifts lazily from a massive fireplace, but even that roaring fire struggles to warm the cavernous room. Servants wrap themselves in layers of wool. Knights keep their cloaks on even indoors. Winter seeps through everything, through cracks in the walls, through narrow arrow slits, under heavy oak doors. And yet, castles survived winters that destroyed entire villages. How? The secret begins months earlier, long before the first snow falls. By late summer, every castle transforms into something that looks less like a military fortress and more like a giant survival machine. Carts begin arriving from nearby villages. Barrels of salted pork, wheels of hard cheese, sacks of barley and rye, dried peas, smoked fish, honey sealed in clay jars, food that could last months without spoiling. In the castle courtyard, workers stack firewood into towering piles against the inner wall. Not just a few logs, thousands. Because once winter begins, cutting wood becomes nearly impossible. A single medieval castle might burn dozens of logs every day just to keep key rooms barely livable. But food and firewood were only the beginning. Beneath many castles, hidden below stone floors and spiral staircases, were vast storage cellars, cold, dark, stable, perfect for survival. These underground chambers acted like natural refrigerators, centuries before electricity existed. Meat cured with salt could last the entire winter. Grain stayed dry. Ale barrels aged quietly in the dark. And the deeper the cellar, the safer the food. Some castles even built multiple levels of storage, ensuring that if one supply ran low, another reserve remained untouched. Because medieval lords understood a brutal truth about winter. The danger wasn't the cold. It was running out. Running out of food, running out of wood, running out of time before spring returned. And history recorded winters so severe that entire regions starved, while fortified castles behind thick walls continued eating from their hidden reserves. But supplies alone didn't guarantee survival, because once winter truly arrived, the castle itself had to change. Rooms closed, passages sealed, daily life compressed into a few flickering chambers of warmth. And inside those walls, another strange and surprising survival strategy began. One that turned the freezing stone fortress into something closer to a living organism fighting against the cold. A strategy that modern homes would eventually copy centuries later. But to understand it, we have to step deeper inside the castle. When winter finally arrived, the castle changed. Not gradually, overnight. The first heavy snowfall was like a signal. Servants rushed through the corridors. Doors were barred. Tapestries were unrolled from storage. Rooms that had been busy in autumn suddenly fell silent, because heating an entire medieval castle was impossible. So instead, they shrunk the castle. Entire wings were abandoned for the winter. Stone corridors went dark and empty. Guest chambers were locked, storage halls sealed. Life collapsed inward, toward the warmest rooms in the fortress, usually the Great Hall. Here, beneath massive timber beams blackened by centuries of smoke, the main hearth roared day and night. Firewood cracked and spat sparks as servants constantly fed the flames. It wasn't enough to make the room truly comfortable, but it kept the deadly chill away. And every living thing inside the castle slowly migrated toward it. The lord and lady, their children, knights, servants, even the castle dogs. At night, people slept surprisingly close together, not because of status or tradition, but because human bodies produce heat. A crowded room could feel several degrees warmer than an empty one. Medieval people understood this instinctively. Warmth was a shared resource, but the real secret weapon against winter cold hung silently on the walls: tapestries. To modern eyes, these enormous woven artworks look like decoration, scenes of hunting, mythological beasts, knights in battle. But in winter, they were something else entirely. Insulation. Stone walls leak heat like a sieve. Cold air seeps through tiny cracks in the masonry. Moisture gathers in the stone, making the chill even worse. But when heavy wool tapestries were hung from wall to wall, something remarkable happened. They created an air barrier, a thick layer of fabric trapping pockets of warmer air between the stone and the room. The difference was subtle, but inside a freezing castle, even a few degrees could mean survival. Floors were covered with rushes or straw. Beds were piled high with furs. And then there were the beds themselves, which looked very different from the ones we use today. Many noble families slept in box beds or heavy wooden canopy beds with thick curtains that could be drawn closed at night. Inside that enclosed space, body heat built up quickly. A tiny, private climate. And before climbing into bed, servants performed another strange winter ritual. They carried bed warmers, long metal pans filled with hot coals, attached to wooden handles. These were slid between the sheets and moved around to warm the mattress before anyone climbed in. For a few precious minutes, the bed felt almost luxurious. But warmth in a medieval castle was always temporary. The fire burned down. Cold crept back. And outside those walls, winter grew harsher. Blizzards buried villages. Livestock froze in fields. Rivers stayed locked in ice for months. And when storms lasted long enough, something far more dangerous than the cold began creeping toward castle gates: hunger, because even the most well-stocked fortress could face disaster if winter dragged on too long. And when that happened, castle life turned into a careful balancing act of rationing, strategy, and quiet fear. Because behind those thick stone walls, survival wasn't just about staying warm anymore. It was about making the food last. And that was where medieval castles revealed one of their most ruthless survival systems. By the middle of winter, the castle had settled into a strange rhythm. Outside the walls, the world looked frozen and lifeless. Fields lay buried beneath deep snow. Villages disappeared under white drifts. Roads were erased completely. No carts, no travelers, no traders bringing supplies, just wind. And inside the castle, every day began with the same silent calculation. How much food is left? Because no matter how well a castle prepared, winter always brought uncertainty. A harsh season could stretch for months longer than expected. Storms could destroy nearby farms the year before. War might have cut off supply routes. And when that happened, the castle's survival depended on something colder than the weather itself. Rationing. The lord of the castle, or more often the steward, kept strict control over the food stores hidden in the cellars. Grain, salted meat, cheese, dried vegetables, and ale were carefully recorded and distributed. Nothing was wasted. A castle kitchen in winter looked very different from the lavish feasts people often imagine. Instead of roasted swans and extravagant banquets, most meals became heavy, practical, and repetitive. Thick barley porridge, dark rye bread, stews made from salted pork and dried peas. Food designed to be filling, not exciting. Large iron cauldrons hung over the fire in the great hall kitchen, slowly simmering for hours. Almost anything edible could end up inside. Vegetables, bones, scraps of meat, herbs stored from summer gardens. The result was a kind of endless medieval stew that could feed dozens of people at once. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And even the animals inside the castle played a role in winter survival. Chickens and pigs were often slaughtered before the cold became too severe, their meat salted and stored. But some animals were kept alive through winter deliberately, especially cattle and sheep, which provided milk, wool, and eventually fresh meat when supplies ran low. In some castles, livestock were even sheltered within the outer walls or nearby barns for protection from storms. But the true insurance policy of many castles stood quietly in the courtyard. The well. A siege or brutal winter could cut off access to rivers or streams. Frozen water sources could quickly become deadly. But castles were designed with deep wells drilled directly into the bedrock beneath the fortress. Even when everything outside froze solid, water could still be drawn from below. Without it, no castle could survive long. Food could stretch, firewood could be rationed. But water? That was life itself. Still, even with food stores, rationing systems, livestock, and deep wells, medieval castles faced a danger that no wall could stop: time. If winter lasted too long, supplies inevitably shrank, and history remembers several brutal years when freezing weather destroyed harvests across Europe. Famine spread through entire regions. Peasants starved. Villages emptied. Yet many castles endured, not because they were comfortable places, but because they were designed for the worst possibilities imaginable. Stone walls blocked the wind, cellars guarded precious food, communities crowded together for warmth, and careful planning turned a brutal season into something survivable. To the people inside those walls, winter was never romantic. It was a test, a long, freezing siege launched by nature itself. And every spring, when the snow finally melted and the roads opened again, the survivors inside the castle stepped back into the sunlight, knowing one simple truth. They hadn't just lived through winter. They had outlasted it.